Mr. Mercer, I'm Agent Brooks. We need to discuss the events of this morning.
This signature is clearly forged, and this plat map proves it. Now you understand the scope of the fraud.
The day she called the FBI on my farm, I knew two things right away. First, she had no idea what she'd just started. And second, this wasn't going to end the way she thought it would. I was out near the south fence line that morning, fixing a post that had come loose after the last storm, when I heard engines rolling in slow across the gravel. Heavier than usual, steady, deliberate. When I looked up, 3 black SUVs were already halfway down my road, moving like they weren't here to ask questions. Even the horses along the ridge went still, just watching. That's when I saw her step out from behind them. Karen from the HOA standing there like she'd finally found a way to force her rules onto land that had never belonged to her. And as those agents started walking toward my gate, badges out in the open, I realized something she clearly didn't. She hadn't just made a complaint. She'd just dragged federal attention onto property my family had been holding long before her HOA ever existed. Before we move on, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'm Daniel Mercer. And if you saw me standing there that morning, mud on my boots, fence tools still in my hand, 3 federal agents walking up my drive, you probably would have thought I was about to get buried in paperwork. That's exactly what Karen thought too. What she never understood was that my farm wasn't some leftover patch sitting next to her subdivision. It was part of something a lot older. My father bought the first stretch of this land back in 1987, long before anyone thought about building neat rows of houses over that ridge. Back then, this whole area was just working land. Fences, cattle, dirt roads, and agreements that actually meant something. Over the years, we kept adding to it. Parcel by parcel, piece by piece. Until our name was tied into more of this county than most people realize. Not in some flashy way, just through records, access routes, and the kind of paperwork that doesn't disappear when new boards or new rules show up. That gate those agents were walking toward. My father built it himself. The gravel road they drove in on. It's been mapped and registered longer than that. HOA has even existed. And Karen, she wasn't new to me. She'd been circling this place for weeks, showing up at the fence line with her clipboard, pointing at my barns, my equipment, even my cattle like she had a say in any of it. First, it was community standards, then visual impact, then shared access concerns. Every time I told her the same thing, calm, simple, clear. This land isn't part of your HOA. That should have been the end of it. But for people like Karen, being told no doesn't stop the conversation. It just makes them push harder. And instead of backing off, she started building something. Complaints, notes, little visits where she'd stand just outside my fence taking photos like she was putting together a case. I let it go at first, figured she'd run out of steam once she realized none of it held weight. But standing there that morning, watching federal agents step onto my land because of her, I realized she hadn't run out of steam at all. She just decided to take it as far as she possibly could. One of the agents, a tall guy who introduced himself as Agent Brooks, stopped a few feet from me and asked my name while his partner, Agent Ramirez, scanned the barns and the storage shed near the tree line. I told him, and before I could say anything else, Karen stepped forward like she'd been waiting for her moment. She started talking fast, pointing across my property, throwing out claims about restricted land use, unregistered storage, blocked access routes, stacking one accusation on top of another, like if she said enough of them, something would stick. I didn't interrupt her, I just watched the agents instead. Brooks let her finish, then turned back to me and said, calm as ever, "Sir, we received a report about possible violations tied to this property. Mind if we take a look around?" I nodded and told him they could check whatever they needed. No hesitation. No pushback. That seemed to catch Karen off guard more than anything. She was expecting an argument, not an invitation, so I unlocked the gate and walked them in myself. We started with the equipment shed she'd been so focused on. I explained what each space was used for, showed them the tags, the logs, the maintenance records. Nothing dramatic. Just the kind of routine documentation you keep when you've been doing things the right way for years. Ramirez asked a few questions about the fuel tanks, so I showed him the inspection dates and permits. Brooks kept glancing between what I was saying and whatever he had pulled up on his tablet. The longer we walked, the quieter Karen got. By the time we reached the back fence line, her tone had changed. She wasn't leading anymore. She was trying to keep up. Then Brooks stopped and looked out toward the ridge where her subdivision sat. Then back at me. Who held the original parcels around this corridor before that development went in? He asked. That question landed differently. It wasn't about storage or access anymore. It was about ownership. I told him straight. My family did. No attitude, just the truth. And for the first time since they arrived, both agents focused on me instead of the property. Brooks held my gaze for a second, then asked if I had anything that could back that up on hand. I told him I did and led them back toward the house. Karen followed, but she wasn't saying much anymore. Just quiet, trying to stay composed. Inside my office, I pulled out a folder I've kept for years. Not because I expected something like this, but because when you've worked land this long, you learn to keep your history close. I set it on the table and opened it. Parcel maps, certified surveys, tax records, access agreements, all laid out clean and simple. Brooks flipped through a few pages, then passed some to Ramirez. Neither of them rushed. They didn't need to. You could tell they'd already seen enough to know this wasn't lining up with what they'd been told. After a minute, Brooks looked up and asked, "Has this property ever been part of any subdivision filing or HOA jurisdiction?" I shook my head. Never has been. He nodded slightly, then went back to the documents. Karen finally spoke up, her voice tighter now, saying she'd been told parts of this land overlapped with community access and drainage tied to her subdivision. Brooks didn't argue with her. He just asked, "Do you have anything that shows that?" She hesitated. Not long, but long enough. Then she started mentioning things she'd heard. Comments from meetings, something someone said at the county office, a planning note she thought applied. None of it sounded solid. Ramirez set one of the maps down and pointed to a boundary line, asking me to confirm it. I did, explaining how that line had been recorded years before her subdivision was even approved. That's when the room shifted. The agents weren't trying to figure out my property anymore. They were trying to understand her claim, and the more she tried to explain it, the less sense it made. Karen tried to steady herself, but you could hear it in her voice. She wasn't sure anymore. She said she was just acting on concerns from residents, that people were worried about activity near the fence line, that she had a responsibility to look into anything that might affect the neighborhood. Brooks listened without interrupting, then asked her one simple question. "Did you verify any of this through official records before making a federal report?" That's where it fell apart. She started circling her answer. Said she believed the information was accurate. Said she'd heard it from multiple sources. But when he asked for anything concrete, a document, an email, a name tied to an official statement, she had nothing. I reached into the folder again and pulled out copies of the notices she'd been sending me, each one claiming authority over land that was never part of her HOA. I set them on the table. Ramirez compared the wording in those letters to the parcel maps in front of him, then looked over at Brooks. No words, just a look. And that was enough. Brooks closed the folder, turned to Karen, and his tone changed just slightly, more direct now. He told her they'd be documenting the gap between her report and the verified records, and that making claims at that level without confirmation could carry consequences she probably hadn't considered. She didn't argue after that, didn't raise her voice, didn't push back. Just stood there, quiet, realizing the situation had completely turned. A few minutes later, they thanked me for my time, handed the folder back, and walked out the same way they came in. Calm, controlled, no drama. Karen followed behind them, but she didn't look at me this time. No clipboard, no attitude, just silence. By the end of that week, the notices stopped. The drive-bys stopped. And just like that, the problem she tried to create disappeared. Funny how fast things clear up when the truth is actually put on record. If you've ever dealt with someone trying to push authority where it doesn't belong, hit that like button, subscribe for more real stories like this, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one.